We're talking about gender dysphoria. Most people I would consider to be transgender most certainly have it. And not only that, it is most certainly a mental illness. There's no doubt about it. You say mental illness should not be a disqualifier from having adoption, but that's not true, clearly. You wouldn't want schizophrenics, psychotics, people like this to be able to adopt children.
Because they're dangerous.
Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. I'm going to give you both the opportunity to do a 2-minute introduction before we get into this and I start asking questions, and then you guys can go back and forth. Brad, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself, and if you tell us a little bit about why you think that it should be legal in this country for gay couples to adopt.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again for having me. For folks that don't know, I'm Brad Polumbo, political commentator, YouTuber, co-founder of Base Politics, reformed journalist. So pretty much, this isn't really a live question in terms of our politics, right? I mean, every state in America allows gay people to adopt, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon. I actually think that if politicians who were against it did try to change it, it'd probably get struck down as unconstitutional anyway, as a violation of the Equal Protection Clause if they tried to ban gay people from adopting. But I think it's an interesting conceptual debate, and I understand that there are people out there who aren't on board, even though I think a vast majority of the public is perfectly fine with this. And I want to just make the case to folks, right? I'm not saying it makes you a bigot, it makes you evil. I'm just saying I think you're wrong, and here's why. So the first question is, who gets to decide? Over here, we have, in a situation like this, right, we have the adoption agency or the birth parents who have decided they want to adopt their child. These are the people entrusted with the child's welfare to a couple of 2 men, 2 women, whatever you have you. And then we have this couple that wants to adopt the child. And then we have random people in other parts of the country. So we have 2 parties who are in total agreement that this is what's best for everybody. Then we have random people like Andrew halfway across the country saying, but you forgot to ask me. Well, nobody really needs to ask you, right? Because part of freedom is that people get to live their lives and arrange their families in ways that you might personally disagree with. And the same way that you want the freedom to raise your children in the way that you see fit, even in ways, I mean, if I don't know anything about Andrew, I'm not saying him specifically, but say very religious people, right? There's lots of folks in this country who think that the traditionalist religious way of raising a child is somewhere between delusional to harmful. Should you still be free to raise your kid as you see fit? I think so. But if we want to start, playing this game, it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna. It's a can of worms that people really want to open. The state deciding who's allowed to have a family and who doesn't.
Well, we are going to open that can of worms at least for the next half an hour. Your 2 minutes is up. Thank you, Brad. Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself and make your opening statement.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Wilson. I'm the host of The Crucible. I'm a political commentator, debater, and satirist. Appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate having this debate with Mr. Polumbo. Thanks for having me. I'm sure it'll be a bit contentious, but I don't take anything personally, Mr. Polumbo. Into the opening statement, what really matters here is what we as a society want to promote for standards and normalcy. Obviously, I'm on the opposite side of Mr. Polumbo on this. My opponent uses a libertarian standard of do as thou wilt, and I use a standard of Christian ethics. He needs to answer as to why it is that thruples, quuples, or sextuples can't adopt if gay men are allowed to. He'll only be able to respond that he doesn't believe the outcomes will be as good, but probably doesn't have much in the way of evidence to support it or a logical argument to support that. Why shouldn't trans be able to adopt, Mr. Polumbo? In fact, basically, who can't adopt in your worldview as the, well, geez, it's all about my freedom and it's all about my libertarianism. Gay married couples, right? This is a sham anyway. Gay marriage has always been a sham. It's not a religious institution, and so that's what makes it a sham. Who cares if you have a contract with the state? You're an anti-statist, but move towards having state contractual marriages, which is insane. It's abhorrent to the church and Christianity, not to mention 75% of gay people support open marriages, which is contrary to marriage. And some half of gays who are married are in an open relationship, which is also insane and shows that it's a sham. Homosexuality also is as much of a social contagion as transgenderism is. By your own logic, this must be true, as you believe transgenderism is a social contagion. And you also go on to say that the sociological institutions have been completely infiltrated by pro homosexual advocates. And this is why they can't make any of their studies or data work out to be true. I don't know why it is that that's only true for transgenderisms, but not or transgenders, but not for homosexuals. I would love to hear an answer for that as well. So as we dive into this, I can't wait to hear why it is that we just absolutely must destroy the normalcy of American marriage, of marriage in general, under a Christian ethical purview, so that basically gay people can get designer children. That seems insane to me.
Andrew, your 2 minutes is up. Thank you for your opening introduction. Brad, is there anything there that you'd like to respond? He did ask you a question there specifically. Is there anything that you would stop at? Transgenders, for example, would you prevent them from being able to adopt?
Oh, absolutely not. Of course not. No. No. Wow.
So what about sextuples or quintuples? Why can't 8 gay men who have orgies every night adopt a child, Mr. Polumbo?
So, well, having orgies every night has no bearing on this.
If
straight people have orgies every night, would you then?
No,
it's
no,
not
I would not. I would not
intrinsically
let
tied to
8
gay people.
Yeah, I wouldn't let 8 heterosexual people adopt one child. Would you?
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
No.
Why not?
Because I think the evidence is very clear.
No, there's no evidence. Where's the evidence that 8 heterosexuals who adopt a child is bad for the child, or that 8 homosexuals who adopt a child is bad for the child? Show me any evidence.
Because a 2-parent household is very clearly shown to be the best way to raise a child.
No. Wait.
Yes.
This is bias in the studies. Just because it's studied only in a 2-parent idea because of monogamous relationship doesn't mean that that's actually better or worse. The question becomes, if you logically are saying to me, Andrew, gays must be able to adopt, and the reason they must be able to adopt is because of my freedom. And who are you to tell me who the hell can or can't have a family? Who the hell are you to say who can or can't have 8, 9, 10 people adopt one child? Who are you to say that, Mr. Polumbo?
Let me jump in for just a second, Brad. I want to point something out, that the DSM is the standard classification of mental disorders used by mental health professionals in the United States. Transgenderism is listed as a mental disorder, but you think that it would be okay for transgenders to adopt, even despite knowing that they are classified as having a known mental disorder, a dysphoria?
Yeah, of course. We don't ban people who have some form of mental illness from adopting. What?
Why would we ban, again,
you think people
couples?
with anxiety shouldn't be allowed to adopt? You think people with depression shouldn't be allowed to adopt? This isn't something that is ever applied as a standard. Who has some form of mental illness? I mean, that's like 1/3 of the country. I don't know the exact number. It's a huge swath of the population. And it doesn't mean they're dangerous or unfit to be parents in any way. And the other thing, too, to say they have a mental illness is a little more complicated than that. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness. Correct. Nobody really disputes that. But gender dysphoria is not the exact same thing as being transgender.
Well, if it's just a claim to self-identification, then it's meaningless and becomes an infinite regress, so it's dismissed anyway. We're talking about gender dysphoria. Most people I would consider to be transgender most certainly have it. And not only that, it is most certainly a mental illness. There's no doubt about it. You say mental illness should not be a disqualifier from having adoption, but that's not true. Clearly, you wouldn't want schizophrenics, psychotics, people like this to be able to adopt children
because they're dangerous.
Well, that's right. Because they're dangerous. Why do we want the
nothing
dangerous
about having
social
gender
contagion?
Dysphoria makes you dangerous.
It's a
to
social
children.
contagion. That's what makes it dangerous. But that we'll leave that aside for a second. Let me ask you again. If it's just all about my freedom, tell me why it is that you think that 8 gay men should not be able to adopt a child. If the laws sufficiently change so that you can have a polygamous relationship and polygamous marriages. And in some states, they're already moving towards that. Why shouldn't they be able to adopt, Mr. Polumbo?
Well, I think the truth is that most people wouldn't place a child into that scenario. So most adoption, if I was running an adoption agency, I don't think that I would adopt out to somebody. If you're asking me, should it be completely illegal? I don't know that it should, but I don't think that people would really choose to place, because these are the people who are entrusted with children's welfare, right? Who run adoption agencies, or the parents who are giving up their child for adoption. They're trying to choose what they think is going to be the best home and family for their child. And I think they should have a lot of latitude in that. And I think very few people would want to adopt their child into
these
people homes.
Well, these organizations use the same standards of sociological metrics, which you yourself reject as being completely corrupt, being completely infiltrated and corrupt by leftist propaganda. They use those same metrics to decide where a child goes or doesn't go, or there wouldn't be gay adoption to begin with. They use those same metrics to do that.
Are you just saying any studies? You're just saying any studies are illegitimate or flawed.
No, that's your standard. Your standard.
It's not.
I'd like to,
You're just
of evidence,
making something up.
The timestamp is at 21 minutes in your video, your last video that you had with a transgender individual. You said to them, the AMA and the APA has been completely and totally taken over by pro-LGBTQ crazy people, essentially. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what
that's
you
not
said,
exact
sir.
Well, I did say that. I think they've been infected by absolutely by woke ideology. I do believe that, but that has nothing,
unless it comes to your ideology.
Every study ever done. What are you talking about?
So that when it comes to your ideology, it's fine.
Andrew, I have a question I'd like to ask of you, Andrew. Can you provide any concrete evidence or examples where allowing gay couples to adopt has led to negative consequences for children beyond any theoretical concerns?
Well, this is framing. So it wouldn't matter if I could or I couldn't. What matters is what's consistent. I want Mr. Polumbo to tell me why it's not, and he still hasn't answered this. Why is it not consistent, Mr. Polumbo, to let 15 gay dudes who live in a house in a polygamous marriage adopt a child? Can you tell me that?
Because that would be bad for the child. That would probably be harmful and confusing for the child.
You're just making that up.
I don't think I am just making that
up.
I think that's pretty clear.
One piece of evidence that that's true.
I don't think we've studied it because I don't think that's happened very often.
Then you just made it up.
Well, we have very clear evidence that it is not harmful for children to be raised by same-sex parents. Extraordinarily clear evidence. Hundreds of thousands of people have been raised by those parents lovingly, and
your standard is not harm for this.
Just the same metrics, and in fact, in some cases, better metrics than average, because the subsection of the gay community that seeks to adopt is only a small subsection of the gay community, and it's people who are very family-oriented. It's people who want to raise a child. It's people who have good financial resources, typically, and so the child generally has a lot of opportunities and does very well. So
your standard is completely and totally arbitrary here. You said in the beginning, your literal open statement is, Andrew, it's none of your business what people do with their family dynamic. It's not. The best thing about America is that we're free, and we're free to have whatever family dynamics that we want to have. So if you don't have evidence showing that 15 gay men adopting a single child is actually contrary to the health of the child, then why is it?
Why are you so insistent on talking about something that
let me finish.
isn't
Hang
happening?
on, I'm almost done. Just let you make your point. Why is it that you can't be consistent and just say, listen, Andrew, it's okay for 15 gay men to adopt a child? I have no evidence to the contrary. I have no evidence that they shouldn't. And that's what freedom's all about.
Well, because I think that you would need to, basically the burden is on you to prove that something should be prohibited, that people's right to form a family should be denied. And so to prove that, you would have to show evidence that that is very harmful, and it's not happening. You just
destroyed your own argument, sir.
No.
Yeah, you just said
what you're saying doesn't make any sense.
You just literally said in order to stop 15 gay men from adopting a single child, that you would have to show evidence. The burden would be on you to prove that there's some negative connotation towards that child. So, Mr. Polumbo, right this second, absent that evidence, it should be fine for them to do, right?
Well, there's a difference between fine and illegal, but I don't know if you would make it illegal. Here's the thing: if it ever starts happening, this is some kind of fantastical notion you've conjured for rhetorical purposes, which I understand is part of an argument.
Nope, there was a 3-way marriage, and they adopted a child, sir.
But so we went from 3 to 15. You're off by a factor of 5 there.
How many? Where should we draw the
there,
line? Should it be 5? Should it be 4?
So
3 is okay,
again,
but
we're
not
talking
16.
about something that's never actually happened. That's fine.
I'd like to move on from this the hypothetical, because it seems we're getting stuck on it. And very briefly, I just want to reintroduce our guests who are joining us live right now for those who might just be tuning in. This is the Wake Up America show. I'm Austin Petersen, and I'm speaking with Brad Polumbo and Andrew Wilson. We're having a debate about the question of whether gay couples should be allowed to adopt in this country. Please like and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you come back and join us on the regular. My next question here is for Brad, and the question is related to our belief in free markets and deregulation on this question of adoption, right? Don't you think that it's possible that the more we deregulate things like adoption, that, you know, children are essentially being commodified to a certain extent, right? Some people are saying from the traditional conservative community that they don't believe that gay couples should essentially be allowed to buy babies, right? So you do believe in some sense of regulation, at least some kind of government regulation of the adoption market to some extent. Is that correct?
Well, so that has nothing to do with gay adoption versus straight adoption. Adoption costs money, right? And so if a straight couple is adopting or a gay couple is adopting, money is being spent to compensate for the adoption. The question of whether or not you are buying or selling a child, I think, is a little bit of a red herring, but it really has nothing to do with gay people versus straight people, because it has to do with just adoption. Are you against all adoption? That's an entirely another conversation that I guess we can have.
It begs the question then, of course, that if there are government rules and standards for who can adopt, then it does open the door for there to be restrictions, such as if someone like Andrew Wilson were to vote on it, preventing gay couples from adoption. There should be some rules and laws regarding adoption, correct?
Right, and they should be focused on the health, safety, and well-being of the child. Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that we should have black markets for babies, you know, bid who wants this baby more? $50, starting at $50. Like, no, we should have a regulated and orderly adoption system that should be open to all fit prospective parents. And that includes a whole lot of gay and lesbian people. I mean, hundreds of thousands of children have been successfully raised by gay couples or lesbian couples in this country. I know some of them personally who wouldn't have it any other way, who are thriving and doing great in their lives. And frankly, it's something that people are just going to have to get over. It's here to stay. There's nothing wrong with it. There's really not much evidence against it.
Andrew, it is your belief then that those regulations, which Brad believes there should be some regulations, your belief is that part of those regulations should be that it should be protected for only a straight couple, male and a female, to be able to adopt children, correct?
Of course. Homosexuality is a non-procreative, reproductive, genetic dead end. There's absolutely no reason other than a social contagion. There is no genetic at all. There's no genetic information which states that a person will or won't be a homosexual. There's no reason to believe it's not a social contagion, just like there's no reason to believe that transgenderism is a social contagion. It's a reproductive dead end. Of course, this is going to lead to designer babies. These are the same people who lied to us and made the bold claim that, wait, this is all about just homosexuals being able to get married. It's not going to lead to insane things like children getting their genitals removed. That's the slippery slope fallacy. That's the slippery slope argument. We were completely right about that. We were totally right that when we allowed degeneracy to enter into the marketplace of ideas, absent any sort of regulation based on my freedom, we end up with these insane conclusions. Of course, this will go to designer babies. Mr. Polumbo is being completely disingenuous, and he'll be here 2 years from now on his YouTube channel saying, I just can't believe that now we're moving into the area of designer babies. I'm totally against this, even though
what does designer
his
babies
ideology
mean to you? Are you discussing
leads
surrogacy?
to it. What's that?
Oh, what does designer babies mean to you? Are you
It just
discussing
means
surrogacy?
look, it's all just designed for a ready to order child for homosexuals. As decadence takes over the United States marketplace, single motherhood shoots up through the roof and has been for many, many, many years. And what's going to end up happening is that adoption agencies, as they have an increase in the amount of children they need to go out there, of course, homosexuals are going to run to the front in order to get as many of them as they can. Why? Because I believe 100%, and I think most Christians believe, that you guys are proponents of grooming, because your ideology only moves through social contagion. You're not born gay. There's no proof you're born gay. So how do you become gay? You become gay through social grooming.
So you think that gay parents are adopting because they want to make those kids gay?
Why is the propensity for children who are born inside of homosexual households? Why is their propensity for being homosexuals themselves so much higher than when they're raised by heterosexuals? Why is it so much higher for children who are raised by transgenders to themselves become transgenders? If it's those are
two very separate and distinct things, because sexuality isn't a choice, it is an ingrained characteristic. Now,
there's no proof for that. There
is
proof.
Could you choose to be gay tomorrow?
I see. So you're saying that transgenderism isn't a social contagion. They're born non-binary, right?
No, these are different things. Gay and trans are fundamentally different, distinct concepts.
Listen, I'm almost done here. I'm almost done. The female to male transgenderism suffer from autogynephilia. Most of them suffer from autogynephilia.
That might be true, but I'd like to stick to the question of gay adoption, if you don't mind, gentlemen. I do appreciate it, and you guys are doing a great job here during this unique debate. But my next question here is for Andrew. Is it fair to deny loving and stable homes to children in need just because the parents might be gay? There could be scenarios, for example, where someone becomes orphaned. Their parents are killed in a car accident, and maybe they have a lesbian aunt who loves their niece or nephew and wants to take them in and have them a stable home. The alternative might be an orphanage, or it might be an adoption agency that might never see them get adopted out. Wouldn't it be better for that child's welfare to stay with that family member if their aunt or uncle happens to be gay, rather than to go through the family system?
This is the problem with this entire agnostic, libertarian, nonsensical mindset. Okay, is it leads always to utilitarianism and consequentialism. It's the only way that they can ever do anything. So they go, if there's a possibility that these outliers, if there's any way, that shape or form, that we can say that the outcome might be slightly better than if they're in state custody, or even somewhat better than if they're in state custody, which maybe that's the truth, we'll ignore the entirety of the social contagion aspect of it, one, and then two, we'll ignore the entirety of the normalcy that we're trying to produce inside of society. What is a heteronormative society where the building block is the nuclear family, right? We're going to ignore all of the decadence and decay that comes with this so that there might be slightly better outcomes for a minute amount of children. That's insanity.
So
you don't make
the exception proves the rule. In some sense.
You don't make policy based on outliers. That's crazy. We should never do that. It's always been a crazy way to look at it, and it should be rejected.
But you could understandably, in that situation, say that might be a case where it would be better than putting them in the state system.
But there could be cases where if they're not in the state system and they're not adopted by anybody, the outcome could be better. This is the problem with utilitarianism. You try to adjust. That's
probably not going to be the majority of cases. That they're better off in state custody than with loving same-sex parents.
Or gay marriage isn't the majority of cases. Gay adoption is not the majority of cases. You can't point to outliers, then say, Andrew, you can't point to outliers.
You're pointing to outliers within this subcategory.
So I'm pointing to outliers and you're pointing to outliers, like I just said.
So what I'm saying is that in the vast majority of cases, gay adoption is going to be better than staying in state custody. And you're saying, well, in some tiny percentage of the time, it might not be. It's like, okay, but most of the time it will be. And the thing we're discussing is whether or not gay adoption should be allowed.
Actually, my argument is that from a utilitarian consequentialist worldview, that you do not take into account what this does as a decadent profile to society itself. Instead,
it doesn't do anything to society.
Yes, clearly it does do something to society, unless you think that society is less or more decadent right this second. If you take a look at the sexual revolution all the way up to the what I would call the homosexual revolution, which really started in the 90s, yes, society's become much more decadent. The reason you have transgender lunatics running around all over the place is because they planted themselves under the LGBTQ flagship, which had all sorts of rights organizations behind it. They integrated themselves into it because most transgenders are just gay men with autogynephilia, and that's the truth. They're gay men with autogynephilia. It has become as decadent as it can be, and the decadence is continuing inside of this field. And you take none of the overarching societal standards into consideration. You only look at the minute outlier and say, for some children, sometimes this can have a better effect. That's crazy. No policy works that way.
You want to destroy other people's families because you don't like them and they
It's a
don't
sham
accord with your
family.
own personal beliefs.
It's not a
Maybe
family.
we think your family's a sham.
Well,
Maybe
that's
we
nice
think
that
the
you
state
think
should go
that.
take your kids.
You
Like, this
wouldn't
is
exist without the reproductive normalcy of men and women. However, if every single homosexual disappeared off of planet Earth tomorrow, there would be not a single negative side effect for society, sir.
except for all the ones that work as doctors, lawyers, firefighters, the
No,
ones
no,
who
no. Their
take care of others.
sexuality, not them as people. If their
Why are you
sexuality
defining people's worth
changed,
as humans by their
the
sexuality?
entire definition of how the homosexual lobby has defined themselves through pride and through everything else has been through their sexuality. All they celebrate is their sexuality. The entirety of the identity of the modern American gay man is their sexuality.
Well,
Coming
no,
on the,
not
we're
certainly
coming
not
up on
for
the
me.
end.
I
We're
think people
coming
just
up on
want to
the
live
end
their
of-
lives and be allowed to be fully functioning, unique individuals and not have that one aspect of who they are held against them by folks like you.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you,
Well, I
gentlemen.
don't want
Thank
my
you, gentlemen.
entire society held hostage so that a couple of guys can have butt sex. That seems insane to me.
Thank you,
Just
gentlemen.
saying.
We're
You
coming
seem
to the
like a
end.
lovely guy.
We are coming to the end of our the first part of this debate, and with their permission, we are going to extend this debate for at least another 15 minutes. Thank you both, gentlemen, for your contributions so far. If you're just tuning into the Wake Up America show, good morning. I'm Austin Petersen. We're hosting our very first live debate about the question of gay adoption. I'm speaking to Andrew Wilson and Brad Polumbo on this topic, and certainly a very spirited debate over this major question that we're talking about right now. Please do click like and subscribe to the channel here at rumble.com/AP4Liberty. For those of you who are just tuning in and missed the first part of this debate, we will be cutting this and posting this on the channel later so that you can enjoy it live at your leisure. My next question here is for Brad. The question of discrimination when it's not done on a governmental level, for example. So I would assume that you would be perfectly fine if a private adoption agency were to choose to discriminate against LGBTQIA plus couples on their own merits. A religious institution, for example, if they are placing couples, that would be something that you would be okay with?
Well, there's two questions. Do I like it? No, not really. Do I think it should be legal and it's within the bounds of their religious freedom? Yes. So I've defended the rights over the years of adoption agencies like the Catholic Charities of the world to place children according to their faith. Because I think people who are giving up a child for adoption have a right to say what kind of home that child will be adopted into. So if they're giving up their child to Catholic Charities or whatever, it's because they want their child placed in a traditional Catholic home with a husband and a wife. And I think that's totally their right. But there's plenty of other adoption agencies out there who look and say, we're open to all. And so if your child is placed through that adoption agency, they're going to place with same-sex couples. So I think they should be allowed to coexist. I think it's deeply counterproductive when like woke activists try to shut down these religious adoption agencies or try to force them to adopt to same-sex couples, because rather than violate their beliefs, they end up shutting down. And we need more people in this work, right? We have lots of kids who needs homes, and I don't think it's helpful to shut down people in the name of, progress or tolerance or whatever. Do I like that they discriminate? No, I don't like it. I probably personally disagree with it, but I do. Yeah, I mean, I'm a libertarian, so ultimately I think that's their right. I've never been somebody who wants to crush them with the arm of the state into giving out kids to all.
Okay, so Andrew, I assume you don't oppose private adoption agencies as well that set their own standards in such a way, and those standards may not, be up to snuff with the ones that you would like to set. So I guess my question for you there on that same topic is, do you oppose private adoption agencies. Some of them might be religious and have your views. Some of them might be more libertarian or, explicitly secular. Do you think that the government should regulate all adoption agencies in this country and have a one-size-fits-all standard?
Okay, so first and foremost, if we look at this particular issue, Catholic charities and Catholicism and adoption has always traditionally been handled by the religious. Same thing with orphans, things like this. In order for Mr. Polumbo to actually be consistent here under his libertarian standard, he would want the state completely removed from this, completely and totally removed from this. They're not even a necessary component. The religious aspect has always been the placers of children, generally with good high status religious families. Same thing has happened with orphans and things like this. Ultimately, I think that the best thing that these private organizations can do as religious members of the community is bar homosexuals, transgenders, and abnormals from adopting children. The stigma, which is then placed unfairly on that child, is overwhelming, as well it should be, as society tends to stigmatize things that they want removed from the public arena. Regardless of what Pew polling might say about how people are a lot more generous now towards homosexuals than they were just 20 or 30 years ago, regardless of that, these things tend to change. We also don't know what the outcomes of this are going to be because this is brand new territory. We don't know what these people are going to be like when they're 40s and their 50s and their 60s. Right now, we're just getting to the point for some gay couples have some kids who went through high school, and sometimes they graduate at higher rates and sometimes they don't. That's the most amount of data that we really have. And doing controlled data that's actually genuine on this is very difficult because, as Mr. Polumbo will state, these organizations are completely and totally infiltrated by pro-LGBTQ propaganda to the point where most of the studies are actually funded by LGBTQ groups. This is not good for society, again. And in order for him to be consistent, you'd think he'd want the state completely removed.
Well, I'm not an anarchist.
So then on that, Brad, I do want you to answer that, but real quick, Andrew, I'm not sure that I got an answer in there in your response about the question of private adoption agencies. Do you think that all adoption agencies should have a government imposed one-size-fits-all standard?
Yeah, I think that this should be underneath a moral purview instead of the state purview. It's probably a lot better for Christian organizations to take over adoption in general rather than the state. The state is a public machine which is designed for grooming of children through either ideology or sexual exploitation, which is why in public schools you see so much molestation, things like this. Yeah, it'd probably be better to take the state out. But if you didn't, you should at least give them some kind of standard, moral standard, ethical standard, other than, well, let's just look at our harm principle, which takes nothing else into account other than possibly for some kids, there's better outcomes.
Yeah, we want to focus on what's best for kids, and you're concerned with superimposing your personal morality onto all of society through coercion.
That would be the opposite. You're trying to superimpose your morality, which is utilitarianism, and your status quo of saying, listen to me, man, what's good is the good based on my arbitrary standard that I can't justify in any way, and I only take the consequences into account that I like and don't even study whatever the other consequences to it may be. You're actually trying to enforce your morality on a state which has always traditionally used Christian ethics as their moral standard. All states are going to use a moral standard. Why should we use your utilitarian moral standard to determine these things, sir?
Because these things should be determined by what's best for the kids.
Why?
It's very clear. Because
justify it.
Because a child's adoption should be about what's best for the children.
Yeah, justify that claim, sir.
Because I want what's best for the children.
Right, because you want. It's all about I want, my utilitarianism. It's
Society
all about that. Sounds like you're
imposing.
Sounds like you're imposing your morality while at the same time trying to pretend that I'm imposing mine. What I'm saying is that the only way that we can have a justification to know what's good for kids is if we have a moral, ethical system and foundation like Christianity so that we can determine a standard. Your
No,
standard
we have
is
hard
just-
data and evidence
You don't
on
know.
outcomes for
that.
kids.
Then
We
let's get
don't.
to that, Brad. Actually, that's what was going to be my next question on this one, Brad. Is what is the hard data and the evidence that the outcomes of children who are adopted by gay couples have just as good or better outcomes as heterosexual couples? I wasn't able to find that data. Maybe you were. Talk to us a little bit about that evidence, because I'm sure that a lot of people need to know. Andrew had stated in his comment before that this is an experiment, that 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line, we don't know what the outcomes of this are going to be because it hasn't been properly studied. You seem to think that there is some hard evidence on the outcomes. Can you talk to us about that, Brad?
Yeah, so one, I don't really agree that it's an experiment because it's actually been happening for a long time. You can go back to, I mean, you have people who are in their 40s or 50s now who are raised by gay couples. They've been adopting since the 70s, but it has definitely gotten more common over time. But so you can look at things, and I don't have all these studies in front of me, but happy to send you some stuff. There have been many studies that track the outcomes for kids that are raised by same-sex couples through adoption, and most find pretty similar outcomes. Some even find slightly better outcomes than the typical adoption situation, whether you're looking at criminal, how likely they are to have a criminal record as adults, how likely they are to graduate high school, how likely they are to attend college, how likely you can also poll them and ask how they feel about their parents and about their childhood and their family. And overwhelmingly, it's positive. Obviously, there's going to be some outliers in any situation. But so I think the burden for folks is on when you have basically the weight of the evidence, the relevant institutions. It's not that they're unquestionable or infallible or can't be corrupted. I certainly think they can be, but the burden is on folks to prove that it is harmful, that the studies are wrong, that the experts are wrong, and not just by saying, well, my religion says so. Like, actually, we have a society where we have a separation between church and state. We don't have an established religion in this country. We're not a theocratic nation. So you have to make an argument as to why the weight of the evidence and everybody is incorrect and the data we have aren't sufficient. But there's not much there to go off of. But you know what, actually, Austin, the one point I'll make, though, is even if you could point to evidence showing slightly below average outcomes, I'm not sure that would be enough to justify adoption of banning adoption by gay people, because you'd be punishing individual fit parents for some sort of statistical discrepancy among a group. And we wouldn't apply that in other contexts. Being gay is an immutable characteristic, different but similar to being black. And if you had lower outcomes on average for black parents who adopted children, I don't think any good person would be sitting here saying we should ban black people from adopting. Now, of course, that's thankfully a non-issue in this country, but there's something about the extrapolation of that example that I think's insightful here.
This is insane. Listen,
Andrew, I want you to respond to
this
that.
Was
a question for you.
This was a total straw man right from the gate. Notice what he did. He did a bait and switch, right? So he says, being gay is an immutable characteristic, just like being black is an immutable characteristic. So he conflates these two things, immediately says to you that you need to accept that this is true. There is no truth that being a homosexual is an immutable characteristic. That's bullshit. Sexuality has been proven to be fluid many times. Been all kinds of unethical experiments, in fact, proving this. I can give you a doctor's name who actually opened up a person's skull and put electronic devices in it, and based on those signals, were able to change their sexuality. We have the MK Ultra project, which demonstrated this through sexuality as well. It's not an immutable characteristic like being black is. So using that
it's you can't change your sexuality. No one chose to be gay.
Prove it.
No one chose to be. I
Where's
can tell
the
you
proof?
Personally.
Oh, your anecdotes prove it. Your anecdotes prove it.
Well,
Show
you can
me
also
the
look
evidence.
at all the data on conversion.
There's
therapy.
no data.
There are extensive studies of conversion therapy,
the conversion
and it failed
therapy,
in almost every case. Almost every ex-gay person turned out to still be
You're
gay
lying
and was
through
exposed.
your teeth using selective data. The truth is that the American Psychological Association was under a huge amount of pressure from outside LGBTQ agitation groups who demanded that they reject what was looking like very promising data. as far as it goes. In fact, I have the former president who was in charge at the time of the American Psychological Association on video explaining how this worked and how it was that outside agitation groups came in and completely and totally made the saturated this entire organization with pro-LGBTQ propaganda and made them reject outright research that was looking very promising when it came to this. So you can't actually make this claim that, well, because there's bias inside of the system to the tune, I mean, to an unconscionable tune, by the way, the former president of the APA himself stating this. And then you say, well, you know, this doesn't actually work. Well, of course it doesn't work. Anytime it's tried, the pro-LGBTQ advocates come out and completely try to dismantle it and outlaw it. They literally in states will try to outlaw this. Why would you try to outlaw it?
Andrew, I'm a little confused by something you said a little bit earlier, and I hope you could help us to explain to us and understand what you were saying when you talked about some of these unethical experiments that were conducted when someone's skull was opened and they placed cathodes on their brain, and you say that they were actually able to change their sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? And if so, wouldn't that suggest that there is a biological factor to sexuality, that it is a mutable characteristic to an extent?
So everything is, I mean, as far as we know in the genetics field, is 50% environmental, right? And 50% propensity. So for instance, you could be an alcoholic who never becomes an alcoholic because you're never exposed to alcoholism. So meaning if the beer is not present, the environment changes, right? So you never move towards being an alcoholic. The same thing could be true under sexual conditioning. Maybe some people have a propensity towards it, but never would act out on it or even be bothered with it, except that environment and kind of the sociological push towards this thing can definitely influence it. We see this inside the trans community, especially. A fantastic way to look at this is showing the social contagion inside of transgender communities. There's no possible way that if that wasn't such a massive fad, that so many people wouldn't be moving towards it. Homosexuality is the exact same way. Yes, we can definitely demonstrate that sexuality can be changed if the conditions are necessary. And yeah, that's not a good thing. We don't want to promote that inside of society. It's a bad idea. And as this has become normalized, the decadence within society has become much, much more problematic.
All right, Brad, I'm going to let you respond, and then we're coming up on the end of our first extended block. I do think that this is a good place for us to end it. So as soon as you're finished with your response there, Brad, I'm going to throw it to Andrew for his 2-minute closer and plug, and then you'll have your opportunity to do the same. Please go ahead.
Yeah, being gay isn't a choice. Nobody would choose it. In fact, most gay people spent years struggling against it and trying everything. I can remember as a teenager trying everything I could desperately to make myself be attracted to women, and I wasn't. Most gay people spend years internally fighting this and then eventually accept it as something they can't change. Everybody knows being gay is not a choice because nobody remembers choosing to be straight, and everybody sitting there in the audience knows that if they wanted to, if they set their mind to it, they couldn't go make themselves gay tomorrow if they're not. It isn't a choice. We don't know exactly what causes it. It's not as simple as a gay gene. It is a mix of factors, and I think that can all be true, but it's clearly not something people sit down one day and choose, and it's something about people that they can't change. I mean, it's just clear based on the experience of every gay person, based on all the data, based on the rampant failure and abuse that occurred every time conversion.
I just have one question. One question.
Sure.
Okay. So is being a pedophile immutable?
You know, I don't know that anybody would choose to experience that perverse attraction.
No, it's just an immutable characteristic. So why do we punish them for it?
Because it's harmful. It hurts people.
Right. So if it's harmful and it hurts people, and I can demonstrate that it's harmful to be a homosexual inside society,
but
we should move towards outlawing it. Yeah, well, I'd love to have that debate with you next because it is. And I can demonstrate it easily.
Maybe another time, gentlemen, for that one. A little too spicy for the morning show, but perhaps maybe an evening debate. Gentlemen, you both did terrific, and I'm grateful for you both being so generous with your time. And thank you for being so brave to discuss and debate such a contentious topic. I have great respect for you both. Andrew Wilson and Brad Polumbo. Andrew, I'll give you 2 minutes for your closer and any plugs that you might like to share with our audience before we let you go, and toss it over to Brad to say goodbye.
Okay, I'm going to yield 30 seconds back to Mr. Polumbo as I interrupted him. I apologize for that. When I wanted to ask that question, you can go ahead, man, for 30 seconds before I go.
Oh, no, you go ahead. You're good.
Okay. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so again, my name is Andrew Wilson. I'm the host of the one and only Crucible. You can find that on YouTube and on all major platforms. I'm a mixed blood sport debater, and I also do social debates. I really appreciate Mr. Polumbo coming out. I know this was contentious. Understand, sir, I don't take any of this personally, and I don't have any ill will towards you. I understand this can be an uncomfortable topic. What I demonstrate is that Mr. Polumbo has absolutely no standard at all for any of his morals or his ethics. I demonstrated that if you were to introduce something like, I don't know, 13 gay men adopting a single child, he actually bit the bullet and said, by its own reasoning, wait a second, if I can't present any evidence for why this is bad, then I guess we have to allow it unless we can provide evidence against it. This is a big problem inside of his ideology because it's all arbitrary. There's no ethical standard for which we should follow for how we actually organize society, which is insane. We also got into the APA and the AMA by his own standards. He knows just how corrupt they are. But interestingly enough, when it comes to his own sexuality, they're right. When it comes to everybody else's everything, that's when they're wrong. Cherry picking after cherry pick after cherry pick after cherry pick. On top of all of this, what you are going to see in the next 5 years is you're going to see what are called designer babies coming up. You're going to see that they're going to be able to almost buffet style select the child. And then you'll see Mr. Polumbo on his channel going, I can't believe that this is happening, even though his own ideology ends up leading towards those outcomes, which is insane to me. I'd love to come back and have a full long form debate on the kind of burdens that homosexuality itself puts on society. I'd be happy to have that conversation with Mr. Polumbo. Thank you so much for having me.
Andrew, where can people follow you online?
You can follow me at Paleo ChristCon on Twitter. You can also follow me on YouTube. You can follow my wife, Rachel Wilson, and her Substack. She also wrote a book, great one, called Occult Feminism. I strongly suggest everybody picks that up.
Brad, your final statement.
Yeah, part of living in a free society is letting people live in ways you disagree with without trying to use the force of government to crush them or to impose your own ideology or morality. Everybody agrees that there are bare minimum standards, that you're not allowed to harm other people, but simply other people organizing their families and lives in ways that you personally disagree with because of your religious beliefs doesn't come anywhere close to meeting the threshold to deny other people their most basic rights and freedoms and ability to form a family and live. We have decades of evidence and examples of kids being raised by loving same-sex parents who go on to live happy, healthy, and successful lives. There's plenty of evidence. It's not all from the AMA. Many of it is from other countries. Many of it is from Europe. So it's not all just from one or two institutions that I certainly acknowledge have been corrupted in different ways. But even to that extent, doesn't mean everything they've ever said or done is wrong. But more broadly, I think that people need to understand that we're going to tear ourselves apart as a society if we don't embrace a spirit of pluralism. We, secular people, libertarians, LGBT people need to accept that religious people are going to want to live their lives and organize their families in ways that we don't really agree with. We should not try, and unfortunately too many people in the LGBT movement have, to crush or dominate them into submission. In the same vein, if they want that freedom for themselves in a country where they are an ever-shrinking minority, they must extend it to others, or they're setting the stage for their own demise. Everybody, thanks for this debate. Appreciate it. Check me out on YouTube. Just search Brad Polumbo, or check out the Based Politics podcast that I co-host.
Andrew Wilson, Brad Polumbo, thank you very much for being generous with your time today and for getting up so early and entertaining our listeners with such an intellectual debate. We appreciate you both. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you very much. What did you all think of Brad and Andrew for our very first debate? Good stuff. Don't forget the Wake Up America show streams live every Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central Time, so you can catch us live if you're watching us later. If you're watching us live, click like and subscribe. Yeah, go ahead, lick that like button. What do you think? The very first of our live debate series. We're going to try and do these at least once a week. If you enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Don't forget, you can send me a text anytime, night or day. 573-319-1586 is the text line. And of course, exit through not the grift shop, the gift shop. That's right, ap4libertyshop.com. When you buy from ap4libertyshop.com, you're helping to support more debates and discussions just like that one. Don't you want more? More? Give me more? I think you do. We appreciate you all very much. We appreciate our debaters. Thanks to Brad Polumbo for giving me that idea. Thanks to you for tuning in live or listening to us later on the Wake Up America show at wakeupAmericashow.com.